The truth was, Joey mattered to Tate, but he had disappointed him. Joey had cared, yet he chose other things over Tate. Joey showed up and sometimes he didn't. All of that was real. All of it existed simultaneously, and I wasn't going to simplify it into something easier just so other people could feel better about it. Standing next to Joey's coffin, I wasn't empty. I wasn't cold. I was holding something complicated, something unresolved, something that didn't fit into neat words or visible emotion. And if that made people uncomfortable, if it made them decide I was heartless or broken, that said more about what they needed to see than anything about what I actually felt, because I wasn't going to lie about him. Not then, not ever. I'm a private man. I don't put my life on display so people can pick it apart, decide what it means, and act as they understand me from the outside. What I carry quietly, not because there's nothing there, but because I learned a long time ago that not everything is safe to show and not everyone earns the right to see it. People confuse privacy with emptiness. They think if you don't explain yourself, if you don't express your emotions in a way they recognize, then there must be something missing. But what's really missing is their access. And still, that doesn't stop them. They watch from a distance and convince themselves they have an inside track, as observation alone gives them authority. Like standing near me during a moment like that at a funeral beside a coffin in the middle of something they don't understand suddenly qualifies them to define me. They build narratives out of fragments, out of silence, out of what I choose not to give them, and then they treat those narratives like facts. They don't ask, they don't wait, they decide. According to them, I grieve wrong. Not openly, not visibly, not in a way that reassures them. They want tears or words, something to label as real. When they don't get it, they fill the gap with judgment. Cold, detached, broken, like grief is a performance and I've failed to follow the script. But grief isn't something I owe to an audience. I don't have to translate it into what they understand. What I feel and how I process it is mine. It doesn't become less real because it's not on display or doesn't match their expectations. And the truth is, most of them wouldn't know what to do with it if I did show them. They don't want the complexity. They don't want the contradictions. They don't want to sit with something that doesn't resolve neatly into sadness or love or regret. It's easier for them to label me than to question their own assumptions. So, they can say what they want. They can believe I grieve wrong, that I feel wrong, that I exist wrong, but they're judging something they were never invited to understand. And I'm not going to open it up just so they can misread it more closely. I grieve wrong, at least that's what Susie, Noah, and Talia have decided. You can see it in the way they look at me, like they're all comparing notes without ever actually asking me anything. Susie says it out loud, sharp and cert. Noah doesn't need to, his silence does it for him, the way he watches and then looks away like he's already made up his mind. Talia reads into every small thing I don't do, every reaction I don't give her. And then there's Andrew, standing off to the side, not saying much, just watching. Observing. The kind of observing that feels clinical, detached, like I'm not a person in a moment, but a case to be studied. It's the kind of word a shrink would use, like there's something to diagnose here, something to label and file away neatly so it makes sense to them. None of them says maybe there's more going on. None of them asks what it feels like from the inside. They just look at what's missing on the surface and decide that's all there is. Because my eyes don't tear up. Because I'm not collapsing in on myself or wailing over the coffin like grief is supposed to be loud enough for everyone to hear. Because I'm standing still instead of breaking down in a way they recognize. To them, that absence is proof of something, proof that I'm cold, detached, or that I don't care the way I should. And somehow that turns into something bigger in their minds. It's not just that I grieve differently, it's that I must be incapable of it altogether. A narcissist. That word gets thrown around like it explains everything, like it neatly wraps up what they don't understand and turns it into something they can point at. But it's easier to label someone than to admit you don't understand them. Easier to reduce a person to a diagnosis than to sit with the discomfort of not being able to read them. What they don't see is everything that doesn't make it to the surface. They don't see the way my body holds things in place because it learned a long time ago that letting go isn't safe. They don't see how controlled stillness can take more effort than falling apart. They don't see that silence isn't emptiness, it's restraint. It's history. It's years of conditioning that taught me exactly what happens when certain emotions get too visible. Because for them, emotion is something that gets expressed outwardly, something that proves itself by being seen. For me, it's something that exists whether anyone sees it or not. It doesn't need to be performed to be real. It doesn't need witnesses to exist. But they don't operate that way, so they assume I don't either. And when I don't match their expectations, they don't question the expectations. My friends question me. Even the way Andrew watches, like he's collecting data, like he's analyzing rather than understanding, it reinforces it. It turns a moment that should be about loss into something else entirely, something evaluative, something where I'm being measured against a standard I was never going to meet in the first place, and I can feel it even if no one says it directly. That quiet consensus building around me, that unspoken agreement that there's something off, something wrong. But just because I don't cry in front of them doesn't mean I don't feel anything. Just because I'm not loud doesn't mean I'm empty. And just because my grief doesn't look the way they expect doesn't mean it's not there. It just means they don't recognize it. Not one person I know really understands me. Not in the way they think they do, not in the way they claim when it's convenient. All of them, every friend, including Noah, seem to latch onto the worst possible version of me and treat that like it's the truth. It doesn't matter what's actually real or what I've lived through or what I've had to learn just to get by. They see what's easiest to label, easiest to judge, and they hold on to that like it explains everything. It's like once they decide who I am, nothing I do can exist outside of that version. They don't see the restraint, the control, the effort it takes to hold things together instead of letting them fall apart in ways that would make them even more uncomfortable. They don't see the choices I make quietly, the ways I hold back, the ways I've had to teach myself how not to become something worse than what they already think I am. They just assume I'm incapable of sacrifice, of selflessness, of affection, because I don't express those things in a way they recognize or approve of. And once that idea takes hold, it becomes permanent to them. Every silence becomes proof. Every controlled reaction becomes evidence. Every moment where I don't perform what they expect gets added to the case they've already built against me. They don't question it, they don't challenge it, they just keep reinforcing it over and over again until it becomes the only version of me they're willing to see. It's not that those things don't exist in me, it's that they've never been in a place where it was safe or worthwhile to show them. But instead of asking why, instead of even considering that possibility, they jump straight to judgment. They decide I don't have those parts at all. And at some point, you stop trying to correct people who aren't actually listening. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds. Because it doesn't matter what you say, they're not interested in understanding, they're interested in being right. So yeah, screw them. I had sex before the funeral for reasons that aren't anyone else's business. Not my friends, not my family's, not anyone standing there pretending they understand me well enough to pass judgment. People like to take one detail and turn it into a verdict, like context doesn't exist, like they're entitled to interpret my choices however they want. To them, it becomes simple. If I chose that instead of standing around crying with my family, then I must be a creep or an asshole or something fundamentally wrong. But they don't know what that moment meant to me, or what I was trying to manage, or what I was trying to avoid. Crying with my family is the last place I want to be, not because I don't feel anything, but because being around them in that state has never been safe, never been real, never been anything but performative or dangerous. There's no comfort there, no understanding, just expectation. They don't want to sit with me in whatever I actually feel, they want something they recognize, something that reassures them. And if I don't give it to them, it turns into judgment, into suspicion, into the same cycle I've been dealing with my entire life. Being in that space, surrounded by people who don't see me and don't try to, is suffocating in a way that has nothing to do with grief and everything to do with history. So I made a different choice, not because it's something I expect anyone else to understand, but because it made sense to me in that moment. Because sometimes control, distraction, physical closeness, something immediate, something grounded feels more manageable than stepping into an environment where I'm expected to break in ways that have never been safe for me. People want grief to look pure, but they ignore how complicated it can get when it's tied up with fear, resentment, and years of learned survival. And the truth is, if I actually showed them what's underneath, if I dropped the control, if I let them see the full weight of it, the anger mixed with loss, the resentment tangled with whatever care was there, the way my mind has learned to protect itself, they wouldn't know what to do with it. They think they want honesty, but what they really want is something they can handle, something simple, something that fits their idea of what grief should look like. If they saw everything, really saw it, without the filter, without the control, they wouldn't call me heartless anymore. They'd be overwhelmed by it, they'd recoil from it, they'd probably wish I'd gone back to being emotionless because that version of me is easier for them to deal with, easier to label, easier to keep at a distance. So they judge what they can see and ignore everything they can't, and then they act like that's the whole story. Part of what they don't understand, what Susie especially doesn't understand, is that when my grief does come through, it doesn't look anything like what they're asking for. It doesn't come out in controlled tears or quiet conversations or some clean, understandable version of sadness. The closest comparison I have is that meltdown with the bat when everything built up too far, too fast, and it didn't come out as words or tears but as something explosive, something physical, something I could barely contain. That's what it turns into when it finally breaks through the control, not something gentle, not something they'd recognize as healthy, something overwhelming, raw, and impossible to package into a conversation. And Susie, standing there telling me I should talk about it, that I should voice my grief, has no idea what she's actually asking for. She thinks she's asking for honesty, for vulnerability, for something real, but she's imagining it in a form that makes sense to her. She's picturing words, maybe some tears, maybe a confession she can respond to. She has no concept of what it actually looks like for me, what it costs, or what happens when that control slips. If I gave her what she's asking for, it wouldn't be something she could sit with calmly. It wouldn't be something she could fix or respond to with sympathy. It would be something that makes people step back, something that makes them uncomfortable in a way they can't easily explain. The truth is, the closest anyone has ever got to seeing that level of grief in me wasn't even at the funeral. It was when everything shut down instead, when I went into that catatonic state, when I couldn't respond, couldn't move, couldn't engage with anything around me. And even then, they didn't understand it for what it was. They didn't see it as grief or overload or the result of too much pressure building up with nowhere to go. They just saw something wrong, something off, something to react to rather than understand. And Andrew standing there, acting like he's analyzing me, like he's above it, like he has some kind of clinical distance, he didn't help. If anything, he made it worse. The way he watched, the way he carried himself, like I was something to figure out instead of someone going through something, it pushed everything further inward. Because how do you let anything real surface when you feel like you're being studied instead of supported? That's the part Susie doesn't get. She thinks I'm withholding something simple, something I could just choose to share if I wanted to. But what I'm holding back isn't simple. It isn't neat. It isn't something that fits into a conversation or a moment where people nod and say they understand. It's something that either stays locked down or comes out in ways that don't look like grief at all. When she says I should talk, that I should let it out, she's not wrong in theory, but she's completely disconnected from the reality of what that would actually mean for me. Because if I did, it wouldn't look anything like what she's expecting. And chances are, it wouldn't be something she or anyone else there would actually be ready to face. I've learned that not grieving is the safest option I have. People don't understand that. They think grief's supposed to come out in one clean, recognizable shape: tears, shaking hands, a voice that breaks in all the right places so everyone else in the room knows you're doing it correctly. But that's not how it works for me. If I let it reach that point, it stops being something I can control. And I've learned the hard way what happens when I lose control. So I shut it down before it gets there. I dissociate when I need to. I pull away from it before it becomes something that spills out into a room full of people who don't know what to do with it anyway. It may not look healthy from the outside, I know that. But from where I'm standing, it's the difference between staying contained and completely falling apart in front of people who will only use it against me later, or misunderstand it, or turn it into something ugly. A meltdown is worse. A breakdown is worse. I've seen what happens when I don't keep things contained. I've seen how quickly people switch from concern to fear, from confusion to judgment. I've seen how fast they decide I'm too much or unstable or something worse just because I didn't manage my emotions in a way that made them comfortable. So yes, dissociation works, not because it fixes anything, but because it prevents escalation. It keeps everything at a distance where it can't hurt anyone else and where no one can turn it into evidence against me. It's not peace, it's control. There's a difference. What people call healthy grieving sounds nice in theory, but in my experience it comes with an audience, it comes with expectations. It comes with people like Susie watching, waiting, deciding whether you're doing it right. It comes with Andrew in the corner pretending he's observing instead of judging. It comes with Noah looking at me like he's already made up his mind about what I am. It comes with all of them deciding, silently or out loud, what my grief says about my character. And I've stopped giving them that, because when I don't show it, they don't get to distort it. When I don't cry, they don't get to label it. When I stay quiet, they don't get to turn my pain into a story about who I am as a person. Instead, they just have to sit with their discomfort, or fill in the blanks themselves. Either way, I'm not the one being exposed. They say I must be a monster for that, for not reacting the way they expect, for not performing loss in a way that reassures them I'm normal or human enough or whatever version of acceptable they're looking for. But they weren't there when things were actually happening. They weren't there when I learned what emotion costs. They weren't there when I figured out that showing too much meant losing control of my own safety. My Uncle Joey is the only exception I can even name, and even that wasn't simple. I was angry at him for a long time, angry in a way I never got to resolve while he was alive. He was there just enough to matter, just enough to make me believe he might stay, and then he wasn't. He chose other things, work, distance, whatever it was, and I didn't forgive him for it. I wasn't going to give him that while he was still around to take it lightly. I was alone in most of it. I always have been. Even when people were physically present, they weren't actually there. Noah, Susie, Talia, all of them, they see pieces of me but not the whole thing, and what they don't understand they fill in with whatever version is easiest to judge. So, when I say I don't grieve the way they want me to, it's not because there's nothing there. It's because I've learned what happens when there is. I look at myself in the mirror in the mornings and there's this question that shows up before anything else. Why am I still doing this? Not in a dramatic way, not as something I say out loud, but as a quiet weight behind everything else. Why does another day feel like something I have to justify instead of something I get to live? And then I step out into people again. Friends, Noah, everyone is moving through their version of life like it's simple, like it makes sense. They don't see the cost it takes for me to exist around them in a way that doesn't make them uncomfortable. They don't see what I have to turn off, what I have to hold back, what I have to reshape just so I don't become something they reject on sight. It's not even about grief anymore in their eyes, it's about performance, about whether I'm showing the right emotions in the right way at the right time, and I've stopped trying to meet that standard. I'm not going to manufacture something just because it makes other people feel better about how they interpret me. I don't owe anyone a display of grief that fits their expectations. I don't owe them softness on command or tears on cue or a version of myself that exists just to reassure them. Whatever I feel it on my own terms, or I don't show it at all. But underneath all of that, there's still this tension that doesn't fully go away. Not because I'm trying to prove anything to them anymore, but because living like this always translated, always filtered, always observed takes something out of a person over time. And even if I refuse to perform it, I still have to carry what it costs to keep everything inside. I look in the mirror in the morning, and there is no dramatic moment of collapse, no cinematic break. Just the quiet reality of someone who keeps going while something inside has gone dim. They call it emotional flatlining, but that makes it sound clean, like a straight line on a monitor. It isn't clean, it's more like distance. Like everything that should arrive fully grief, sadness, reaction comes in muted, diluted, or delayed, as if it has to travel too far to reach me. I don't want to feel grief. That isn't said like a confession so much as a boundary. Because grief, in my experience, doesn't behave the way people expect it to. It doesn't show up politely, it doesn't leave on schedule, and it doesn't match the timelines other people seem to follow when they talk about moving on or processing. The people around me, my friends, my family, they live in a world where emotions seem to have a recognizable structure. Something happens, they react, time passes, and the shape of it settles into something understandable. But my reactions don't fit that pattern. They stretch, they loop back, they linger long after the moment has ended, like an echo that refuses to die out. Sometimes it isn't even sadness I feel, but the absence of it. A kind of emotional blindness where I know I should be feeling something, but it doesn't arrive in the right form or at all. And then later, sometimes much later, it shows up out of nowhere as if it was always on its way but took the long route through me. There is nothing normal about the situations I'm trying to process, and maybe that's the point that gets missed when people compare experiences. They say grief is universal, and maybe it is, but it doesn't arrive universally. It doesn't land the same way in everybody or every mind. Mine takes longer, mine loops, mine refuses to compress itself into something neat that other people can recognize on sight, and the hardest part isn't even the grief itself, it's the pressure to make it look right while it's happening. When I'm emotionally overwhelmed, I don't want to be touched. It isn't about rejection or distance from other people in a moral sense. It's more like my body becomes a closed system for a while. Any external contact, even something meant to be comforting, feels like too much input at once, like adding pressure to something already stretched thin. In those moments, physical closeness doesn't translate as safety. It registers as intrusion, and I need space just to stay regulated. That's part of why I didn't sleep with Noah after I found out Joey was dying of cancer. It wasn't a decision shaped by lack of feeling or lack of trust, and it wasn't about him specifically. It was about capacity. When grief hits in a certain way, it collapses my tolerance for anything that requires emotional availability or physical openness. I can care deeply and still be unable to engage in closeness at the same time. Those two things don't cancel each other out, even if it can look that way from the outside. There's a persistent idea that grief should follow recognizable patterns, that there's a normal emotional expression that other people can read and validate. But what I experience doesn't sit neatly inside those expectations. It stretches, it delays, it shuts down, it returns in uneven waves. And because it doesn't present in a way people easily recognize, it creates this pressure to translate it into something more acceptable or understandable, even when that translation doesn't actually match what's happening internally. I can't always explain that to my friends, not because I don't want them to know, but because there's a gap between lived experience and what people expect grief to look like. When that gap is too wide, language starts to feel inadequate, like anything I say will either sound too intense or not intense enough. So it becomes easier to stay quiet, even when silence makes me feel like I'm the only one operating in a different emotional language. I stopped trying to explain myself a long time ago because every version of the explanation came out wrong. If I say I feel nothing, people think I mean I don't care. If I say I feel too much, they expect tears, shaking hands, something visible enough to confirm it. But what I actually live with is neither of those things. It's distance. It's a delay. It's standing in a room where something important has happened, and realizing my body didn't get the memo on how it's supposed to react. Noah lives in a world that makes sense to him. A world with clean lines. Loss happens, you grieve, you remember, you move forward. He has red-rimmed glasses and soft ideas about the future, about people staying, about life arranging itself into something stable if you're just patient enough. I don't have that. I never really did. My world doesn't arrange itself. It fractures, it repeats, it holds on to things too long and refuses to let them become neat memories. So, when Joey was dying, when Tim was gone, when my grandmother stopped being a place I could still reach, I didn't become someone who grieved correctly. I just became someone who kept existing while everything inside me failed to translate the moment into feeling. What makes it worse isn't the grief itself. It's the way people start looking at you like you're missing a step everyone else has. Like there's a shared instruction manual and I skipped a chapter without realizing it. I can see it in the way conversations shift when I don't react the way they expect. I can feel it in the space between what I'm supposed to be and what I actually am. And then I start performing quietly, carefully trying to match an emotion I can intellectually understand but not fully access. That's the part that starts to feel like a lie, not because I'm trying to deceive anyone but because I'm trying to survive in a language that doesn't fit me. And Noah isn't the problem, not really. He's just living in a version of reality where grief eventually resolves itself into something recognizable. I don't know how to explain to him that mine doesn't resolve, it accumulates, or it goes underground, or it shows up months later in places that don't make sense. So I stay quiet, I keep it contained. I let people assume I'm either fine or broken in a way they can categorize. Anything is easier for them than the truth, which is that I don't experience loss in a way that feels linear or clean or even readable from the outside. I'm not asking to be fixed. I'm not even sure I want to be understood in the way people usually mean it. I just don't want to be treated like I'm failing at something I was never given instructions for in the first place. I'm broken, shattered in ways I don't have words for anymore, and still every morning I have to pull myself together like there's nothing wrong with me, like I'm not carrying things that would make most people fold under the weight. I get up, I get dressed, I walk into a life that expects me to function like a complete person, like I'm whole and stable and consistent, like I know how to be the best version of myself on command. But there are days when there is no best version. There's just me trying to hold the edges together so nothing spills out in front of everyone. I have a wife, I have in-laws, I have friends, I have all these connections that look normal from the outside, and maybe that's the part that makes it worse, because from the outside everything looks like it should make sense. But inside it doesn't line up that way at all, and I end up feeling like I'm constantly translating myself into something more acceptable so people don't look too closely at the parts that don't fit their expectations. And what drains me isn't just what I've been through, it's the feeling of being measured against people who don't even realize they're measuring me. Like there's some invisible standard for how grief is supposed to look, how a person is supposed to react, how long it's supposed to last, how it's supposed to resolve, and I keep failing at it no matter how I show up. I can't act normally because nothing about what I've lived through feels normal in my body or my mind, and I'm tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Tired in a way that comes from constantly trying to make something understandable out of things that never became understandable in the first place. It starts to feel like no matter what I do, I'm always one step away from being seen as a disappointment, not because I'm not trying, but because what I'm carrying doesn't translate into the kind of visible grief or visible healing people expect to see. I don't need more judgment layered on top of everything else I'm already dealing with. And I don't need to be treated like I'm falling short of some standard I was never given the tools to meet. I'm not asking people to fix what they don't understand. I'm just tired of being reduced to what I can or can't perform in front of them. I'm tired of feeling like the way I survive each day is being quietly graded by people who don't see the parts of the struggle that never make it to the surface. I'm going through enough that already feels like it takes everything I have just to stay upright, and what I need more than anything is space to exist in it without being turned into a failure for not processing it the way someone else would. After I left Noah, something in the air between us didn't just break, it went quiet, like a door closing without anyone admitting they heard it. And when he told me he didn't care if I froze at night in the cold, it landed in a place that didn't even hurt right away. It was too blunt for that. It just sat there heavy and flat, like confirmation of something I'd already started to suspect long before he said it out loud. I've started to understand people's endings before they officially happen. The distance comes first, then the language gets sharper, then everything that used to feel like attachment starts to look like obligation. So when I think about Noah, I don't think in dramatic rupture, I think in gradual absence. and maybe that's why it doesn't surprise me anymore to feel like he's given up on me. It feels delayed rather than sudden, like I was just waiting for the moment someone would finally stop pretending they still knew what to do with me. It's not just him though, it never really is. It's my family too, the quiet kind of disappointment that doesn't announce itself but shows up in how people look at you when they think you've made the wrong choices too many times to be misunderstood anymore. I see it in my mom, especially in the way her face tightens when my name comes up, like she's trying to decide which version of me she believes in that day. She said I abandoned Noah, like it was a verdict instead of a moment, like there wasn't a whole history behind it that no one asked about and no one seemed interested in hearing. And maybe that's the part that sticks the most, not just that people draw conclusions but that they don't leave room for anything else. They fill in the gaps with whatever version of me makes the most sense from the outside, and then they treat that version like it's the truth. I've lost people in pieces over time through distance, through illness, through circumstances I couldn't control, and now it feels like the remaining connections are thinning out too, not always loudly, not always all at once, but in ways I can feel even when no one says it directly. And the hardest part is that I've learned not to fight every assumption anymore because explaining myself has never really changed the outcome, it just leaves me more exhausted in the end. I don't even know when it turned into this, when everything started feeling like something I'm just enduring instead of living. It isn't one big moment I can point to, it's an accumulation. It's the slow stacking of people leaving, people judging, people deciding who I am before I've even had a chance to explain myself. And now, it's reached a point where I walk through my own life like I'm inside something I didn't agree to build. I've started to believe people only tolerate me in rotation. Family at Sunday dinner, friends in conversations that feel like they're waiting for me to slip up, my mother looking at me like I've already become someone she's disappointed in. Noah somewhere behind me in time, like a version of my life that got shut off but still echoes when I'm alone. And the worst part is how predictable it all feels now, like I've watched enough people step away that I can recognize the signs before they even fully leave. At home, it's quieter but not better. It's a different kind of pressure, the kind that comes from pretending everything is functioning when it doesn't feel like anything fits correctly anymore. Even closeness feels complicated, not because I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, but because I don't recognize myself inside it. I go through the motions of being present, of being a partner, of being whatever role I'm expected to hold, but it often feels like I'm acting out a life that was decided without me. And then there's the part I can't say out loud without everything collapsing into misunderstanding. The way even intimacy has started to feel like something I'm supposed to perform rather than something I actually want or can fully step into. Not because I don't understand what it's meant to be, but because I feel disconnected from it, like my internal state and my external expectations are no longer aligned. So I comply in small ways just to keep things from breaking further, and then I resent myself for it afterward because it feels like another place where I disappear a little more. So it builds into something darker over time. Not just anger but exhaustion with people, with expectations, with being interpreted instead of understood. I say I hate everyone because it's simpler than explaining how constantly seen I feel and still not known at all. I say people leave because it matches what I've learned to expect. And I say I'm not good for anyone because it feels like the only conclusion that explains why, no matter how I try to adjust myself, I still end up here standing in the middle of a life that feels both full of people and completely alone at the same time. I live like I'm constantly being observed, even when no one is speaking. It's not always direct judgment, it's something quieter than that, something I've learned to anticipate in the pauses between words, in the way people look at me a second too long, in the way conversations shift slightly when I enter the room. My family judges me when I have sex, or at least it feels like they do, like there's an unspoken moral accounting happening around choices that should have nothing to do with anyone but me. My friends aren't immune to it either. They may not say it outright, but I can feel the shape of their opinions forming around me, like I'm always one decision away from becoming someone they quietly respect less. Even the people closest to me, people who are supposed to understand me beyond surface-level versions of who I am, start to feel distant in a way I can't fully explain. The person I've shared my life with, the person I've fallen asleep next to more times than I can count, sometimes feels like they're looking at me through a lens I don't recognize. Like somewhere along the way, I became a version of myself that they interpret before they ever ask me who I actually am in that moment. And once that interpretation settles, it becomes harder and harder to dislodge. What wears me down isn't one specific accusation or moment, it's the accumulation of it. The feeling that every part of my life is something that can be evaluated, discussed, or quietly judged after I've left the room. My relationships stop feeling like places I exist inside of and start feeling like spaces where I'm being assessed. Even intimacy doesn't escape that shift, it becomes another thing that can be interpreted. Another behavior that gets filed under some version of who I'm supposed to be. And I keep reaching for the point where it stops feeling like this, where something about my life feels neutral again, unobserved, unmeasured. But instead it just continues to expand. The sense of being seen without being understood grows stronger, not weaker, and I start to lose track of what it would even feel like to move through my life without imagining how it will be received after I've already lived it. I don't think I'm afraid of being known. I don't want anyone to know me or the shit I carry every day so deep within me so no one would know. I think I'm exhausted by being interpreted by unsympathetic people. Wayne's call is another reminder that life isn't fair. I pick up the receiver, and before I even fully settle into the sound of it, I already know I don't want the conversation. Wayne's on the other end, like he always is when something about me has turned into leverage. He talks like there's an arrangement I agreed to, like there's a version of events where I owe him something that keeps growing teeth every time he calls. He isn't asking questions. He's checking in on a debt or a promise or something that has long stopped feeling like either of those things. He asks if I've sent the check yet, like it's the only detail in my life that matters right now, like my days are structured around whether or not I've complied. I tell him it's in the mail, it's automatic. It comes out smoother than anything else I've said all day, which is what makes it worse. Because even as I say it, I know I don't mean it in the way he understands it. And I know he knows that too. There's a kind of shared dishonesty in it, like we're both participating in a script neither of us respects but neither of us steps out of. And then something in me snaps just slightly off-center. If it's not, you can go fuck yourself. It's not loud, it's not even particularly dramatic, it's just clean, final, a line drawn without ceremony. I slam the receiver down before he has time to turn it into anything else. A conversation, a threat, a continuation, whatever he was trying to build, I don't give it space to exist. For a moment after that, the room feels too quiet, like the air is waiting for me to explain myself to it. I don't. I go back over to the table, forcing my hands to do something normal, something that looks like I belong in a life where phone calls like that don't linger in the walls. That's when I feel it, the awareness of being watched without anyone moving. Noah is staring at me, not shocked, not surprised, just still in a way that says he's been collecting pieces of me for a while now, trying to decide what they add up to. I don't look at him directly at first. I pretend I'm adjusting something on the table, like I can reset the moment through small physical actions. Stupid telemarketers, I mutter. It lands weakly, even to me, a cover story that doesn't quite close all the way. I can tell Noah doesn't believe it, not fully, not even close. And what I hate most isn't that he questions it, it's that I already know he's right too. I don't think I ever realized there was anything unusual about it at the time. It just felt like the way things were supposed to be. We were always there, me and them, like we were part of the same pattern that kept repeating itself in different places. Same classrooms, same playground corners, same stretches of time where neither of us seemed interested in going off and being separate for too long. I didn't think of it as something I chose, it was just what happened. I talked a lot back then. I still do, but it was different when I was younger, less filtered, less aware of whether people were listening in the right way. They always did though, at least it felt like they did. And I listened back not because I thought I was supposed to, but because it made everything easier when someone actually cared what you said instead of waiting for you to finish. We'd talk about whatever made sense at the time, small things mostly. What happened that day, what we noticed, what we thought was funny, what didn't make sense yet. There wasn't anything complicated about it. No planning, no expectations. Just time passing with someone who felt familiar enough that silence didn't need to be filled. Looking back now, I think what people call intimacy is probably just a tension that doesn't disappear when it gets inconvenient. But back then, I didn't have a word for it. I just knew that things felt steadier when they were around, like I didn't have to keep recalibrating myself every few minutes. I don't know when it started to feel like something people would later try to define or separate. At the time, it didn't feel like something that needed explaining at all. It just felt like growing up next to someone who was always there, the same way the rest of the world was always there, too. I love Noah. I've said it so many times that it stopped feeling like a declaration and started feeling like a fact I carried around with me everywhere I went. It didn't matter where I was, school, home, anywhere in between, the words were always there, sitting just behind my teeth as they belonged to the air I was breathing. People tried to make it sound like something simpler than it was, like love was supposed to have a single shape or a single meaning, but mine never fit that neatly. Sometimes I called it love because that was the only word available. Sometimes I called it something else in my head because even that word felt too small for what it was supposed to hold. But I never stopped saying it. even when it felt misunderstood, even when it felt like it came out of me without permission, even when I wasn't sure if the people hearing it understood what I meant by it. Because what I meant wasn't just a feeling, it was a kind of persistence. A way of holding onto someone in language when everything else felt uncertain. A way of saying, you matter here even when I don't know how else to show it. And maybe that was the only version of love I knew how to give consistently, something spoken, repeated, carried forward through every version of myself I didn't fully understand yet. I love living with Noah even though technically he lives with me. It's not something I say to make it complicated, it's simple in my head even when it doesn't sound simple to other people. I feel safe around him in a way that doesn't require explanation, safe enough to be quiet, safe enough to exist without performing anything. I like the small routines we fall into without planning them, sitting in the same space without needing to fill every moment with conversation, competing over the remote as if it matters more than it actually does. The easy friction of sharing a life with someone who understands your habits without needing them explained every time. Noah keeps asking what we are to each other. Brothers, friends, family. He tries on different words like he's looking for the one that fits properly, and every time he asks I can see it land in him when I don't give him a clear answer. Like uncertainty creates distance, distance means something has been taken away. But it isn't that I don't care about him. It's the opposite, actually. I care enough that I don't want to force our connection into a label that doesn't feel honest to me, because labels feel permanent in a way that real life doesn't always match. They come with expectations I'm not always sure I can meet or even understand. What I want isn't distance, it isn't confusion either, it's stability, continuity, the sense that someone stays in your orbit without needing to redefine it every time the world asks for a category. I think Noah hears no when I can't give him a definition, but what I mean is something closer to, I want you here, I just don't know how to name the shape of it without breaking what it already is. Everyone was there that evening. My entire family arranged around the table like it meant something more than just eating together. My father sat at the head, exactly where he always sat, posture straight, expression unreadable in that way that made it clear the night would orbit him whether he spoke or not. My aunts filled in the sides, their quiet conversations weaving in and out like background noise that never fully settled. Joey was there too, a few seats down, leaning back just enough to look comfortable, watching everything unfold like he wasn't entirely part of it. And then there was my father's business associate, placed carefully into the evening like an extra set of eyes, turning what should have been routine into something staged. From where I sat, it didn't feel like a family dinner. It felt like something I was expected to get right without ever being told the rules. Every movement carried weight, how you spoke when you spoke, what you chose to say or not say. Even silence felt like a decision that could be interpreted. I could feel it pressing in from every side, the expectation that I would fit into whatever version of myself made the evening run smoothly. Noah asked my mother a question. "Who's Wayne?" It didn't register as a question, it registered as exposure. I choked before I could stop it. Water went down wrong, burned its way back up, and suddenly I was coughing hard enough that I couldn't even pretend to hold it together. The glass slipped in my hand, the sound of it hitting the table louder than it should have been. I could feel its eyes turning, conversations cutting off mid-sentence, the entire room narrowing in on me in a way I hadn't prepared for. My aunt's hand hit my back once, twice, harder than necessary, like she was trying to knock me back into control. "Tate," she hissed low and sharp, not just concern, correction. I forced myself to breathe, to swallow it down, to stop the coughing before it turned into something worse. My chest burned, my throat raw, but none of that mattered as much as the fact that the room had gone quiet in the way it only does when something has gone off script. "Wayne." Of all things to surface here at this table, with my father sitting at the head like nothing ever slipped past him, with a stranger present who didn't belong but would remember everything anyway. I didn't look at Noah right away. I couldn't. Looking at him would make it real, would confirm that this wasn't something I could deflect with a joke or bury under small talk. Instead, I kept my eyes on the table, on the spill, on anything that didn't require me to answer. "Just someone from NYC, I managed finally, voice rougher than I wanted it to be, quieter too, as if I kept it contained enough it wouldn't travel the length of the table again. It was a bad answer, too vague, too quick. I knew that the second it left my mouth. I could feel my father's attention shift without him moving, the kind of focus that didn't need to announce itself. My aunts had gone still, their earlier murmuring replaced with something more deliberate, listening, waiting. And Noah. I didn't have to look at him to know he wasn't buying it. That was the worst part. Not the question, not the reaction, not even the room tightening around me. It was the fact that whatever he thought Wayne was, it was already worse than anything I could safely admit out loud. Joey's voice slid into the silence as it belonged there. I didn't know Tate had another friend. The word landed wrong, not loud, not aggressive, just angled enough to turn every head without raising his voice. I didn't have to look at him to know he was smiling. I could hear it. Joey never said things straight when he could twist them just enough to make everyone else do the work of reacting. My stomach tightened before I could stop it, not because of the word itself but because of what he was doing with it. I finally looked up, just enough to catch the shift, Joey's gaze flicking from me to my father like he was connecting dots that weren't supposed to be visible. Or worse, like he already had and was waiting to see who else would catch up. Friend. He made it sound like a contradiction, like me having a life outside this table was some kind of punchline. I felt it then, the familiar narrowing of the room, not physically but socially. Conversations didn't resume, no one rushed to fill the space. They were waiting, watching, letting it sit long enough to mean something. My father didn't say anything, he didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than anything Joey could have added. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it wasn't correction either, just observation. Calculation, that was worse. I kept my expression steady, or at least I tried to. Neutral was always safer. Anything else invited questions I didn't have answers for, not ones I could say out loud here. It's not a big deal, I said, quieter than I meant to, like I could shrink the entire thing back down if I didn't give it too much shape. But the second it left my mouth, I knew it did the opposite, because now it was something. Now there was a thing in the room, Wayne, unnamed but present, hovering between Joey's smirk and my father's silence like a problem waiting to be defined. And Joey leaned back slightly, satisfied in a way that made it clear he didn't need to push any further. He'd already done what he wanted. He'd taken something that should have been nothing and turned it into a question no one was going to forget. I could feel Noah's attention on me again, heavier now, sharper, not just curious or suspicious, and I hated that more than anything, not Joey's tone, not my father's silence, but the fact that whatever this looked like from the outside, I didn't have a version of the truth that would make it better. Noah opened his mouth again, like he was about to pull the thread all the way through, like he didn't understand what would unravel if he did. I didn't think. I just moved my hand, finding his under the table, fingers tightening around his wrist harder than I meant to, pressing in like pressure could translate into something words couldn't safely carry. Stop, be quiet, not here. I didn't look at him when I did it. I couldn't. Looking would have made it obvious, made it something people could see instead of something that stayed contained between us. So I kept my gaze forward, fixed on nothing in particular, while my grip said everything I wasn't allowed to. For a second I thought he might pull away, or worse, keep talking anyway, but he didn't. The tension in his hand shifted just slightly as he understood, like whatever I just said without speaking actually reached him. And then slowly he looked down at his plate, the movement small enough that no one else would question it, but deliberate enough that I felt it land. Relief came first, immediate, sharp, almost disorienting, and then something else followed right behind it. I glanced at him then, just briefly. Long enough to see the way his shoulders had tightened, the way his posture folded in on itself like he was trying to take up less space. His eyes stayed down, but I could see it anyway, the glassy edge, the kind that comes right before something breaks through. I didn't want Noah to cry, not once, and suddenly I knew he was about to. The realization hit harder than anything else that had happened at the table, harder than Joey's tone, harder than my father's silence, harder than the question itself, because this was something I couldn't control once it started. My grip loosened, but I didn't let go completely, not yet, like part of me still thought I could hold the moment in place if I didn't fully release it. I didn't want him to cry, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much about what it would do here, what it would expose, how quickly the room would turn if he lost control in front of all of them. It would ruin everything, not just the dinner, not just the fragile balance I was barely maintaining, everything. So I stayed still, quiet, controlled. And I hated the part of me that needed him to stay the same way. I made it through dinner by staying quiet, by shrinking every reaction down to something small enough no one could grab onto. But Joey's joke didn't leave the room when we did. It followed me out, sat in my chest, turned heavier with every step down the hallway. I knew where this was going. My father didn't do things in front of people, not like this. He waited, let the room clear, let the performance end, then he finished it in private. So I went to his office before he could call me there. It felt better that way, like I was choosing it instead of being summoned. I barely made it through the door. His hand was on me before I could even register the movement, fingers closing hard around my throat, driving me back into the wall with a force that knocked the air out of me in a sharp, useless gasp. My head hit just enough to blur the edges of the room. The door clicked shut behind me like it had decided to stay out of it. I didn't fight him, that was the first rule. Fighting made it worse. My hands came up instinctively, not to push him away, just to find some kind of balance against his wrist, the wall, anything that would keep me upright while my lungs tried to catch up. His grip tightened just enough to remind me how easily he could cut off what little air I had left. My father wasn't a nice man in any context. Not personally, not privately, and not in the spaces in between where people pretended things were different. Up close, he always smelled like class. Like everything about him was deliberate, measured, held together so tightly that anything outside of that felt like an insult. He leaned in, close enough that I could feel the shape of his words before he even spoke, his voice low and sharp, like he didn't need volume to make it land. "Why," he said, slow and precise, "is Wayne's name falling out of Noah's mouth?" I couldn't breathe. For a second, maybe longer. It's hard to measure time when your lungs stop working. Everything narrowed down to the pressure of his hand and the sound of my own pulse pounding against it. My vision edged out at the corners, dark creeping in like it was waiting for permission. And then, just as suddenly as he'd taken it, he let me have air again. Not freedom, just enough to keep me conscious, enough to keep listening. That was always how he did it, my father already knew. I could see it in the way his grip shifted, not loosening, just adjusting, as the question had never been a question at all. Wayne wasn't new information to him. Wayne was history. A file he'd already opened, already judged, already decided what it meant about me. "That blackmailing cunt's name is never said in this house," Terrence seethed, the word cutting clean, deliberate. "Wayne is an embarrassment to this family. Because of your carelessness and folly, that boy knows sensitive private affairs that impact this family. It's your fault for bringing that troublemaker into this house in the first place." Blonde, loud, out of place the second I brought him into a house that didn't allow for anything uncontained. "You brought him into my home," my father continued, his voice low but carrying more weight than anything shouted across a room. "You disrupted this family over what? A passing juvenile sentiment." I tried to answer, but the pressure at my throat made it impossible. My voice caught before it could form, turning into something useless, swallowed before it existed. My hands hovered near his wrist again, not pushing, just bracing, like I could steady the moment if I stayed still enough. He didn't need my response anyway, he never did. The next hour didn't feel like time moving forward. It felt like being held in place while everything I'd ever done wrong was laid out in front of me, reinterpreted, sharpened, turned into evidence. His words didn't rise, they pressed. Constant, controlled. Every sentence was measured to land exactly where it would do the most damage. Which is why tonight felt different, wrong in a way I couldn't immediately process. It didn't start with the belt. It started with the silence after he decided words weren't enough anymore. That was the real break, the moment where something in him shifted from controlled to something sharper, something that didn't need to explain itself. I remember the sound more than anything else. Not loud, not chaotic, just distinct, final, like a line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed once it happened. I didn't fight him, not because I agreed, not because I thought it was right, but because I didn't recognize this version of him and I didn't know what would make it worse. That was the part that stayed with me, the unfamiliarity of it. Pain fades, even the shock of it fades, but the realization doesn't. That was the one thing he had never done before, he was capable of doing. That whatever boundary I thought existed between control and something else, it wasn't fixed, it wasn't safe, it could move whenever he decided it needed to. And afterward, when it was over, there was no acknowledgement, no explanation. No shift back to something normal, just silence again, like nothing had happened, like this too was something I was expected to absorb, adjust to, and never speak about. And that's when it settled in, not just what he'd done but what it meant, not that tonight was an exception, but that it might not be. Wayne became a symbol, not a person, a mistake, a disruption, proof, and then somehow it shifted. My father whipped me for 20 minutes with his metal belt and buckle. My ass was covered in welts and I bit back tears trying to avoid making a scene. The pain didn't come all at once. It settled in after, sharp in places, dull in others, spreading across my back and sides like something that didn't belong to me but wasn't going anywhere. Every movement reminded me of it, small shifts, breathing too deeply, even standing still. It made the room feel closer than it was. By the time Terrence stepped back after many blows, I wasn't looking at him anymore. Not directly. My eyes stayed fixed somewhere lower, somewhere safer, because I knew better than to meet his gaze when he was like this, when he decided something. He adjusted his sleeve like nothing had happened. That was always the worst part. The way my father could return to himself so quickly, like whatever had just taken place didn't require acknowledgement. Like it was just another correction, another necessary step in maintaining whatever version of order he believed in. "Listen carefully," Terrence hissed, standing over me holding his fist in my face. His voice wasn't raised, it didn't need to be, it was controlled again, precise as the earlier loss of control had already been folded back into something deliberate. I stayed where I was, shoulders tight, breath shallow, waiting. "That blonde runt you keep as a pet," he continued, each word placed exactly where he wanted it, "does not speak in my house unless he understands his place in it." Noah, he didn't say his name this time, but it hung there anyway, unmistakable. "You will make sure of that." There was no room in it, no space for interpretation. I never gave my father a reason to inflict violence on Noah, and with Joey always around keeping Terrence at bay, I told Noah to never bring up Wayne again, and as far as I know, he never had. People in my family judge me for what they think I am and for what I don't do. The things I accomplish in the sexual lifestyle I pursue aren't deserving of judgment. I don't need judgment. I need compassion, but it's something that not many people in Los Angeles offer me. I fucked all of my female teachers in high school to meet my father's high standards of excellence so Noah wouldn't be sent home. I'm a victim of statutory rape because the relationships and sexual lifestyle I had before I was 18 in California were extremely illegal. All the adults who touched me physically before my birthday in 1986 are guilty of rape. Every adult in Los Angeles objectified me as a minor and stared at me in inappropriate ways. I was propositioned and solicited by every lowlife who wore a suit or dress. Every high-standing member of society viewed me as a piece of meat, and I could recall over 50 times that adults offered to pay me money if I would get in their car. I wasn't even 18 yet, and I was sexually abused by everyone. Even if it didn't become a physical act, people made me uncomfortable. Most abuse was verbal, sexual innuendos or jokes meant to make me feel obligated to let them molest me. I hated it when people would hug me as a teenager because I could feel their hands roaming and touching me inappropriately. I didn't like it when people touched me, which is why I flinched, because any time an adult touched me, it was to feel me up carnally. The relationship I had with Jay, my father's ward in the 1970s, was great, even if it was a consensual experience, which is ludicrous because I wasn't even 6 years old. It might have felt consensual, but it was wrong. My family does not know or have any concept of what Tate Blue's life really is. Tate used statutory rape in his relationships with adult authority figures as a coping mechanism for far worse abuse that has never seen the light of day. It didn't start with me. It started with a glass of white wine sweating in my mother's hand and a room full of women who believed boredom was best cured by other people's lives. It started with lace tablecloths, too bright laughter, and the soft violence of curiosity disguised as concern. It started, as most things did in our house, with something small slipping out and becoming something too big to hold. "I mean, they share a bed," my mother said. Just like that, no pause, no wait, no understanding of what she had just placed into the air. The sentence hovered, delicate as perfume, and then it spread. By the time I heard about it, it wasn't a sentence anymore. It was a story. By the end of the week, it was 10 different versions of the same story, each one sharper than the last, each one carrying the same quiet accusation: boys don't do that unless something is wrong, or worse, unless something is happening. Los Angeles in 1984 didn't ask questions to understand you. It asked questions to define you, to file you neatly into a category that made other people comfortable. And if you didn't fit, they didn't expand the box, they cut you down until you did. I was easy to misunderstand. Black hair, quiet, the kind of boy people described as handsome in a way that sounded more like an observation than a compliment. I performed masculinity the way they expected, but I didn't conform to it either. I just existed somewhere in the middle, which, to them, meant I must be hiding something. And Noah made it worse. Blonde, soft-featured, always slightly hunched over a book or a thought. He had a way of moving through the world as if he were apologizing for taking up space. People called him feminine, as if it were a flaw, as if it explained everything about him without needing to know anything real. Put us together in a twin bed, and suddenly the world thought it had solved a mystery that never existed. I remember the first whisper. It came wrapped in a joke. "Must get pretty cozy in there, huh?" Said with a smirk, said like they were inviting me to laugh along, to confirm something without saying it out loud. I didn't answer. That was mistake number one. Silence, I learned quickly, doesn't stop rumors, it feeds them. The conversations multiplied. At school, in hallways, behind lockers, in the spaces just out of sight but never out of earshot. "I heard they've been doing it for years. No way his mom would let that happen if it wasn't, you know. Maybe she doesn't know. She said nothing physical." "Yeah, and you believe that?" Laughter, always laughter, not because it was funny but because it made them feel safe. Because if they could laugh at it, they didn't have to confront the possibility that intimacy didn't always look like what they thought it should. The truth was so simple it sounded like a lie. We slept, that was it. I ran cold in a way I didn't understand, and he ran warmer than I should have. Winter nights in that house could bite through the walls, and he'd curl toward me without thinking, like instinct, like survival. I'd complain about him stealing my heat, and he'd mumble something half asleep, and that would be the end of it. There was no moment where it became something else. No line crossed, no secret, just sleep. But people don't believe in simple when complicated is more interesting. My mother tried to fix it. That might have been the worst part. "I told them nothing ever happened," she said one night, standing in the doorway, like that should be enough. Like clarification could undo imagination. "Why did you tell them at all?" I snapped. She didn't answer right away, because there wasn't a good answer. Because adults don't like admitting they made something fragile into something public just to fill the silence. "It just came up," she said finally. Things always just came up. When people didn't want to admit, they chose to say them. Noah heard it too, of course he did. Rumors don't move around people, they move through them. He got quieter, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice. But I saw it in the way he held his shoulders tighter, in the way he hesitated before sitting next to me in public, as proximity had suddenly become dangerous. "I can sleep on the floor," he said one night, not looking at me. The words landed wrong, heavy. "No," I said immediately. "It's not a big deal." "It is," I cut in. "No, he doesn't sleep on the floor." I wrapped my arms around Noah from behind. "You're too soft, sweet, and sensitive to sleep on a hard wooden floor. You deserve the best, and I'm not going to let ignorant, narrow-minded, sexist pigs from school impact what we already have, and if they can't understand that what we have is platonic, they're the idiots." Because it was not the bed, not the rumors, but the idea that something pure between us had to be rearranged to make other people comfortable. They didn't just talk about us, they rewrote us. In their version, I wasn't just a boy, I was a contradiction, attractive but suspect. Masculine enough to confuse them, not masculine enough to reassure them. In their version, Noah wasn't just Noah, he was evidence, proof of something they couldn't name but were desperate to define, and the bed became a symbol, not just of warmth, not of friendship, not of survival through cold nights, but of everything they feared, misunderstood, and wanted to control. The gossip peaked at one of those parties I wasn't supposed to hear about, but I did. Because houses carry sound and voices carry further when people think they're safe. You know, boys don't just do that, sleep together and nothing happens. Especially at that age. 16, please. There has to be something going on. Or something wrong with one of them. Or both. And then quieter. Los Angeles is changing, you know, you hear things. Like we were a symptom of something larger. Like we were proof of a shift they didn't understand and didn't want to. I stopped correcting people, not because I agreed, but because I realized something. They weren't asking for the truth, they were asking for confirmation, and anything I said that didn't match what they already believed would just become part of the story. Denial, suspicious, anger, defensive, silence, guilty. There was no version of me they would accept unless I became exactly what they had already decided I was, so I chose something else. I chose not to perform for them at all. At night, nothing changed. Noah still curled toward me when the temperature dropped. I still complained about him being a heat thief. He still muttered half-asleep responses that made no sense in the morning. The world outside could twist it, distort it, turn it into something ugly, but inside that room it stayed what it always had been. Simple, unspoken, real. If there was something physical happening, it wasn't what they thought. It wasn't desire. It wasn't secrecy. It was present affection. It was the quiet, steady proof that someone could exist next to you without needing anything from you except that you stayed. And for reasons no one in those rooms full of gossip would ever understand, that was enough. They needed it to be something else. Because if it wasn't, then they had to confront something uncomfortable. That intimacy doesn't always fit into the categories they built. That closeness doesn't always come with a label. That sometimes two people share a bed and the only thing happening is that neither of them wants to be alone. I hadn't even made it 5 minutes inside the school foyer. That's how long it took. 5 minutes from stepping onto campus Monday morning, 5 minutes of lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, the stale smell of chlorine still clinging to the air from early swim practice before it found me, or maybe it had been waiting. Yo! A shoulder bumped mine, not hard, just enough to redirect me like I was being steered into something I hadn't agreed to. Tate, my man, another voice added behind me like I didn't already know who I was. Laughter followed, not loud, controlled, the kind of laughter that lives just under the surface ready to spill if it gets fed the right reaction. I kept walking, mistake, because walking meant I didn't shut it down, and not shutting it down meant permission. Hey Tate, one of them called louder now, you going to pretend you don't hear us? I stopped, slowly, turned just enough to see them without fully facing them. 3 of them, maybe 4, it didn't matter. They always came in groups, strength in numbers, or maybe just fear of standing alone. What? I said. Flat, not aggressive, not inviting, just there. They closed in like they'd been waiting for the cue. So it's true then? One of them asked, grinning like he already knew the answer he wanted. What's true? I said. Another laugh. You and that kid, someone else chimed in, the blonde one, Noah, right? They said his name like it tasted strange. Yeah, I said. What kind of relationship do you have with him? There it was, not a question, a setup. I could feel it before I even answered, the hallway shifting, people slowing down just enough to listen without looking like they were listening. Conversations thinning out at the edges, curiosity stretching toward us like it needed to feed. We're childhood buddies, I said. Simple, true, useless. Buddies, one of them repeated, dragging the word out like it was something to chew on. Yeah, we heard about your sleepovers. More laughter. Twin bed, right? Another added. That's what your mom said. My jaw tightened before I could stop it. They noticed, of course they did. Ooh, one of them leaned in, mock whispering, he doesn't like that. Relax, another said, holding his hands up like he was the reasonable one. We're just asking, trying to understand. Understand what? I said. What kind of buddies share a bed at 16? There wasn't a right answer. I knew that the second the question left his mouth. There wasn't a version of this conversation where I walked away clean, but I answered anyway. It's something we've done since we were little kids, I said. It's not anything sexual, not physical, just mere buddies. I shrugged like it didn't matter, like they hadn't already decided. Silence. A beat then. Just guys being guy friends, someone echoed, barely holding back a smile. Yeah, I said. That's when it shifted, not loud, not explosive, just a subtle collective understanding passing between them like a signal, and... Dude, one of them laughed, I've got friends, I don't sleep with them. Yeah, another added, unless it's like he made a face, exaggerated, He didn't finish the sentence, he didn't have to. Is he your pet or something? One asked, tilting his head like he was genuinely curious. Follows you around, sleeps next to you, is that what that is? Or your lover, another cut in sharper. There it was, not implied, said, out loud, the word hung there heavier than everything else they'd said. Lover. Like they'd finally named it, like they'd been building to it. I shrugged again, same motion, different weight. It's neither, I said, you're making something out of nothing. Nothing, one of them repeated. Man, nobody shares a bed for nothing. Especially not with someone like him. That one hit different, quieter but sharper. Someone passing by slowed just enough to glance over. 2 girls by the lockers leaned closer together, whispering, A guy further down the hall pretended to adjust his backpack while clearly listening. It wasn't just them anymore, it was everyone. I'm serious, I said, keeping my voice even. It's not what you think. Then what is it? One pressed. I hesitated, because how do you explain something simple to people who need it to be complicated? It's just, we've always done it, I said. Since we were kids, that's it. That's it, one mocked softly. That's it, another repeated, shaking his head like he was disappointed in me. Man, one of them said, stepping closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel like a secret. You can just say it. Say what? That you like him. Laughter again, quieter this time, meaner. I didn't say that, I replied. But you didn't say you don't, he shot back instantly. There it was, the trap, say no and it sounds defensive, don't say no and it sounds like confirmation. I don't need to explain myself to you, I said. It came out colder than I expected, that got a reaction. Whoa, one of them smirked, touchy. Yeah, another added, definitely hiding something. They weren't listening, they never were, every word I said just became something else in their hands, twisted into whatever shape they needed to keep the story alive. Locker room later, one of them muttered to another, not even trying to hide it. Oh, this is definitely getting around, the other replied. It already is. And it did. By the second period it had evolved. By lunch it had multiplied. By the time we hit the gym it wasn't even about me answering questions anymore. It was about them telling the story. The locker room was louder than usual, or maybe I just noticed it more. Metal doors slammed harder, voices carried further, everything echoed. I stepped inside and the conversation didn't stop, it shifted, like a current redirecting. That's him, someone said. Not quietly, not subtle, just enough to make sure I heard it. I moved to my locker, opened it, focused on the routine, bag down, books in and jacket off. Normal. If I acted normally, maybe it would stay normal. Another mistake. Yo, Tate, a voice called from across the room. I didn't look. Hey, louder now, we're talking about you, man. The least you can do is join in. A few chuckles. I shut my locker, turned. Go ahead, I said, sounds like you don't need me. That got a few oohs, not supportive, just entertained. Now we want your side, one of the jocks said, tossing a towel over his shoulder like this was casual. Clear things up. Yeah, another added, because right now it sounds like you've got a boyfriend. Laughter echoing off tile and metal. I don't, I said. Then why share a bed? Because we do. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Man, someone muttered, that's messed up. What is? Stringing him along like that. That one caught me off guard. Or maybe, another jumped in, he's the one stringing you along. More laughter. Yeah, someone added, little blonde's got you pussy whipped. I could feel it building again, not just questions anymore. Narratives, versions of me I didn't recognize were being passed around like they were facts. He probably cries if you don't let him sleep there, one said. Or maybe you do, another shot back. Yeah, Tate, you're the one who can't sleep alone. Need your little heater, someone laughed. That one almost made me smile, because they weren't entirely wrong, just not in the way they thought. Say whatever you want, I said finally, it doesn't change anything. Doesn't change the fact you're sharing a bed with another dude, one replied. Tate folded his arms and stared at the group of jocks, clearly growing tired of their assumptions. Yeah, Tate said, he's not a dude I'm looking to hook up with. I've known Noah since we were 4 years old and you're not going to turn our relationship into something dirty, sexual, or perverted just because you only know how to see human bodies as something to rub up against. We have sleepovers, we have fun, we watch movies, sometimes we crash in the same bed, that's it. There's nothing strange about being comfortable with someone you've known for most of your life. Maybe that's the problem with all of you. You seem to think everyone you're close to has to fit into one of two categories, people you're friends with or people you want to sleep with. You're missing out on an entire world of relationships that don't fit into either category. The jocks exchanged uncomfortable looks. One of them scoffed, so, you seriously expect us to believe you two are just that close? Yeah, Tate replied immediately, because not every bond needs a romantic or sexual explanation. Another jock shook his head. I've never heard anyone talk about a friendship like that. That says more about you than it does about me, Tate said. One day when you get hair down below your waist and you have more than 3 brain cells in your brainstem, you'll realize that there's more to life than humping girls and getting validation from other idiots who happen to be in this room. A few of the jocks laughed nervously while another looked down at the floor, suddenly less confident than he had been moments earlier. Tate continued, "Sometimes someone can simply matter to you. Sometimes you can love a person deeply without wanting anything from their body. There are friendships, family bonds, lifelong companionships, and 100 other forms of connection." The tallest jock crossed his arms. "So you're saying we're the ones with the limited view?" "Exactly." The group fell silent. Tate gave them a pointed look. "In a few years you'll realize there's more to life than girlfriends and guys you played ball with." One of the jocks finally muttered, "Okay Tate, point taken." Another nodded reluctantly, "Yeah, I guess we never really thought about it that way." Tate shrugged, "That's all I wanted you to understand." That stopped a few of them, not completely, but enough, because I didn't deny it, I didn't dress it up. I didn't give them anything new to twist. "You're weird, man," someone muttered. "Yeah," another agreed, "that's not normal." I shrugged, same as before. "You're just jealous, I'm irresistible," I said. "Maybe you're all jealous that the richest teenager in California doesn't want to watch movies with you or share a bed." Because for a second they didn't have a response ready, no script for that, no easy comeback for someone who wasn't playing defense. "Still think there's something going on," one said, quieter now, like he needed to recover ground. "Yeah," another agreed, "no way, it's just nothing." Maybe they needed it to be something. Maybe nothing scared them more than anything they were accusing me of. I grabbed my stuff, closed my locker. "Believe whatever you want, losers," I said. And this time, I walked away before they could stop me. Noah became the #1 target at school the moment the rumors spread. It didn't take much, just a whisper passed between lockers, a glance held too long, the wrong person noticing that he spent his nights too close to the most desired straight boy in town. After that, it was inevitable. The hallways turned hostile, laughter sharpened. Words like weapons followed him from classroom to bathroom, from cafeteria to bus stop. They said it as if they knew him, like they had the right to define him. They made Noah feel like he was gay, and the truth was he was. But he carried it like something fragile, something dangerous. A secret pressed deep beneath layers of fear and silence. He wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be, not here, not in a place that chewed people up for being different and called it normal. I saw what it was doing to him, so I tried to stand in the way of it all. I stepped between him and the slurs, between him and the shoves in crowded hallways, between him and the fists that sometimes found him in places teachers didn't watch closely enough. Bathrooms, stairwells, corners of the school where cruelty felt invisible. I couldn't stop everything, but I tried. When no one was around, I made up for it in the only way I knew how. I held him closer, sat too nearby, let my shoulder linger against his. Quiet, hidden moments where the world couldn't reach us. I tripled every small gesture of affection, every glance, every word that might remind him he wasn't alone. "I love you," I told him once. Platonically, that's what I said, that's what I told myself too, because it was safer that way, easier to survive. Teachers called us unnatural, their disappointment wrapped in forced professionalism. Students didn't bother hiding it, they laughed, pointed, whispered loud enough for us to hear. Gay, they said, like it was something ugly, something to be ashamed of. But I didn't care because they were wrong, at least. That's what I kept telling myself. Noah wasn't a label, he wasn't a rumor or a punchline or something broken that needed fixing. He was warmth in a cold place, he was quiet comfort in a world that never seemed to stop shouting. And if I could protect him, if I could keep him safe long enough, maybe he wouldn't leave, maybe he'd stay. I pulled Noah out of more fights than I could count. Most of them happened where no one was watching, bathrooms with broken locks, echoing tile, the kind of places where cruelty felt protected. They said they were trying to fix him like he was something bent, something wrong, like violence could straighten a person into something they approved of. Noah never fought back the way bullies did. He wasn't built for that kind of brutality. He'd come out shaking, eyes glassy, breath uneven, as the world had just reminded him again that it didn't want him the way he was. I'd steady him, pull him somewhere quiet, tell him it was over. But it was never really over. One day, after it got worse, after I saw just how far they were willing to go, I went to the principal. I thought maybe, finally, an adult would step in. Maybe someone would do their job. I told him everything. The names, the threats, the violence. He listened, calm, detached, and then he said Noah was lucky that people cared enough to straighten him out. For a second I thought I heard him wrong, but I didn't. Something in me snapped clean, sharp, irreversible. All the fear I'd been holding back, all the anger I'd swallowed to keep things from getting worse, it surged up at once. Before I could stop myself, I flipped him off, called him what he was, an enabler. Because that's what he was doing, dressing up neglect as discipline and cruelty as concern. Letting it happen, excusing it, giving it space to grow, and walking out of that office I realized something worse than the bullies existed, adults who knew and chose to do nothing. Because the principal refused to do anything because he dismissed the violence like it was some kind of twisted rite of passage, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. If the system wouldn't protect Noah, then I would make sure the system felt exposed. I waited until the weekend. Everyone in town knew the principal's home life wasn't as polished as his office persona. His wife had a reputation, quietly unhappy, distant, the kind of woman people mentioned in low voices at diners and grocery stores, not scandalous, just lonely, disconnected, the kind of detail that lingers in a small town waiting for a spark. I didn't need to create something from nothing, I just needed to give people something to talk about. I fucked his wife in his home in their bed. He walked in on us while we were fucking and I told him to get out while a real man got the pleasure of satisfying his wife. By Monday morning, the rumor had already started to move. It didn't shout, it spread the way things do in tight communities. A comment here, a knowing look there, someone claiming they saw something they probably didn't, someone else swearing it must be true because it made sense. By lunchtime, it had a shape. By the end of the day, it had a life of its own. People were whispering about the principal's house, his marriage, and the idea that things behind closed doors weren't what he pretended they were. And woven into it carefully and deliberately was the implication that he couldn't even control what was happening in his own home, let alone in his school. He found out faster than I expected. I could see it in his face the next time I passed him in the hallway, the tight jaw, the forced composure, the way his eyes flicked toward me not with authority but with something sharper, suspicion, maybe even recognition. He never said anything out loud, but he knew, and after that something changed. The bathrooms got checked more often. Teachers started paying closer attention in the hallways. The fights didn't disappear completely, but they stopped being invisible, stopped being ignored, and most importantly, he never bothered us again, not Noah, not me. It wasn't justice, but it was a statement. I remember the first day of preschool with a kind of clarity that doesn't belong to most early memories, as it etched itself deeper than everything else that came after. Then suddenly I was sitting at one of those tiny plastic tables, legs barely fitting underneath, swinging my feet while I munched on apple slices dusted with cinnamon. The smell was sweet and warm, and I remember feeling oddly proud of them, like I had the best snack in the room. Kids were crying, some clinging to their parents, others staring blankly as they'd just been dropped into a different universe. I saw a blonde boy sitting a few tables away. He wasn't like all the other little boys. He was skinny as a rake, but his cheeks were plump and round, making him absolutely adorable. Joey would have called him a puppy. He had golden blonde hair with warm, almost yellow locks that seemed to glow under the lights. He was the kind of child who made mothers stop and squat down just to kiss him on the nose because he was so impossibly cute. Earlier that day, I had noticed that his mother barely seemed to notice him. She acted less like his mommy and more like a babysitter who happened to be responsible for him. I knew Jay wanted me to find someone I could be around, a little boy who could make me feel safer, especially whenever my father was around. Then I noticed the blonde boy's gangly little legs dangling over the edge of the tiny stool he was perched on. He was happily munching on a sandwich, his round cheeks puffed out like a squirrel storing food for winter. He held the sandwich with both hands like a little gentleman, even sticking his pinky out as he ate. My God, he was adorable. I couldn't stop watching him. There was something innocent about him that immediately drew me in. He seemed completely unaware of how cute he was, sitting there with his messy golden hair, enormous cheeks, and tiny legs swinging beneath the stool. But then I noticed his clothes. They were worn and clearly inexpensive. Judging by the state of them, I figured he must have grown up on the poorer side of town. And somehow, that only made me want to know him more. I stared a second too long, then I picked up my apple slices and walked over as I had already decided something without thinking it through. "Hey," I said, dropping into the seat next to him. He looked at me, a little startled, cheeks slightly puffed from a bite he hadn't finished yet. He didn't say anything right away, just blinked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was talking to him. I held out the apples. "These are easier," I added, with all the confidence a preschooler could muster. He glanced down at the slices, then back at his sandwich, then at me again. Slowly, carefully, he swallowed what he had in his mouth. "It's too big," he admitted quietly, like he was confessing something important. "I know," I said, nodding like an expert. "You can have some of mine." He hesitated for a second, then reached out and took one. Small fingers, careful grip. He bit into it and his expression shifted, surprise first, then something softer. "It's good," he said. "I told you," I replied, smiling a little. He looked at his sandwich again, then back at me. With a kind of shy determination, he pinched off a piece much smaller this time and held it out. "You can have some too," he said. I took it. It was uneven and a little squished, but I ate it anyway like it was the best thing I'd ever been offered. We sat there like that, trading pieces back and forth, apple slices for bits of a sandwich. No rules, no awkwardness, just this quiet, unspoken agreement that we were sharing something that mattered more than the food itself. "What's your name?" I asked after a while. "Noah," he said. I started, then told him my name, sitting up a little straighter like it meant something now that he knew it. He nodded like he was storing it somewhere safe. "Okay," he said simply. Neither of us had much else to say after that, but it didn't feel like we needed to. We just kept eating, a little less messy now, a little less alone. Looking back, I don't think either of us understood what was starting in that moment, but I remember how easy it felt, how natural, like sitting next to him was the most obvious choice in the world. Much later, long after that first shared lunch, I started to notice it, before either of us had the words for it. This quiet, almost reverent way Noah looked at me sometimes. Not constant, not obvious enough for anyone else to call it out, but it was there. In the way his eyes lingered a second too long. In how he'd mirror what I did without realizing it. A kind of soft hero worship, the kind that grows out of comfort and admiration before it ever becomes anything complicated. One afternoon, we were sitting together like we always did, sharing space more than conversation. I had a container of apple slices, dusted in cinnamon the way I liked them, and Noah had already helped himself without asking, something he only did with me. He leaned back slightly, chewing, then tilted his head like he was studying me. "What?" I asked, catching him staring. He didn't look away this time. "How come you're so attractive?" The question landed in that blunt, unfiltered way only he could manage, honest, curious, not fully aware of how loaded it sounded. I smirked a little, more amused than anything. "Attractive." He nodded like it was obvious. "Yeah, people look at you a lot." I shrugged, trying to play it off even though part of me liked that he noticed. "It's probably just my jawline," I said, tapping my face lightly. "And my features, some people just get lucky with genetics." "Genetics," he repeated, the word rolling awkwardly in his mouth. "Yeah, like what you're born with," I explained. "You don't really choose it." He watched me for another second, then broke into this small, warm giggle like the explanation both made sense and didn't matter at all. "That's funny," he said, reaching over to grab another apple slice from my container. "You sound like a commercial." I laughed. "What kind of commercial talks about jawlines?" "I don't know," he said, shrugging, already chewing, "but I'd believe it." He shifted a little closer, close enough that our shoulders brushed. He didn't pull away. "You don't think you're attractive?" I asked him after a moment. He hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "Not like you." "That's not true," I said more seriously now. "You just don't see it." He looked back at me, searching my face like he was trying to decide if I meant it. "You have nice hair," I added, reaching out without thinking and lightly tugging at a strand of his blonde fringe. "And your eyes are, I don't know, kind." "Kind?" he echoed, a little unsure. "Yeah," I said, "that counts." He smiled, then small at first, then a little brighter as something in him settled. "I like your apples better than my lunch," he said, changing the subject in that quiet way he always did when things got too close to something real. "Obviously," I replied, "they're superior." He laughed again, softer this time, and took another slice like it was already his. We didn't say anything for a while after that, just sat there, sharing food, sharing space, his shoulder still lightly pressed against mine, but I could feel it, the way he looked at me, and the way, without admitting it, I liked being seen that way. A few days after our first sleepover when we were 4, I woke up in the dark, not knowing where I was. It was one of those disorienting moments where everything feels wrong before your mind catches up. The room felt different sounds, unfamiliar shadows. For a second I thought I'd been left somewhere. My chest tightened, small and sharp, the kind of fear that doesn't have words yet. I remember sitting up too fast. The blanket slipped off my shoulders and I froze, blinking into the dim shape of the room. My breathing got uneven, that shaky, half-awake panic building before I could even think to stop it. Then I felt movement beside me. Soft, slow. Noah shifted in the bed, still half asleep, turning toward me like he'd sensed something without fully waking up. His blonde hair was messy, sticking out in uneven little tufts, and his face had that soft, unguarded look kids only have when they're completely comfortable. No awareness of how he looked, no self-consciousness, just trust. He reached out without opening his eyes fully, and found me. His small hand landed on my arm first, then he scooted closer like it was the most natural thing in the world. Before I even had time to process it, he wrapped his arms around me, not tight in a startling way, just steady, certain, like I belonged there. My breathing slowed without me meaning it to. He pressed his face lightly against my shoulder, letting out a tiny, sleepy sound, like he was settling back into a dream even while half awake. His grip didn't loosen. If anything, it adjusted more securely, more intentional in that instinctive childlike way. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't complicated, it was just comfort. Noah was like that even then, like a teddy bear you didn't realize you needed until you were already holding him. Warm, soft, present in a way that made the room feel less empty. I remember noticing the details the way kids do, without understanding why they mattered yet. His blonde hair brushing my cheek, the small rise and fall of his breathing, the way his fingers curled slightly into the fabric of my shirt like he was anchoring himself there too. He had this look even then, something gentle in his expression even while asleep. His face relaxed, peaceful, almost doll-like in the way people sometimes describe children when they're still enough to seem unreal. His features were soft, rounded by age, but already there was something striking about the way he just was, uncomplicated, unguarded. But more than anything, what stood out wasn't appearance. It was him. Noah didn't have edges the way other kids did, no sharpness, no cruelty that hadn't been learned yet. Even as a child, he was the kind of person who reached for comfort instead of conflict, who gave instead of taking, who held on because it felt right to hold on, not because he was afraid to let go. He stayed like that for a long time without waking fully, just holding me like it was instinct, like I was supposed to be there and there was nothing unusual about it. And slowly the fear in my chest started to fade, not because anything outside had changed, but because he was there. Warm against me, quiet, steady in the simplest way a person can be. Even then, before either of us had any language for it, Noah had that kind of presence, something grounding, something gentle enough to make the world feel less sharp. And I remember thinking, somewhere between sleep and waking, that if he stayed like that I could probably stop being afraid so often. I remember the first time I had a seizure in bed, though I didn't understand what it was at the time, only that everything suddenly stopped making sense inside my own body. Noah was there next to me, asleep, his head resting on my chest the way it sometimes did when we fell asleep too close together. It had become normal for us, even then, him drifting off first, me staying awake a little longer, and eventually both of us ending up tangled in the same quiet space. The room was dark except for the faint outline of the furniture, the kind of stillness that makes nighttime feel bigger than it is. Then it started. At first it was just a strange sensation, like my body wasn't listening to me properly. A tightening I couldn't explain, a disconnect between thought and movement. My breathing felt wrong, too shallow, like it was slipping away from me. Noah, I tried to say, but the word didn't come out right. My muscles seized before I could understand what was happening. My chest jerked, my arms stiffened, and everything inside me turned chaotic at once. It wasn't gradual, it was immediate, overwhelming, like my body had decided to rebel against me without warning. Noah stirred from the movement. At first he didn't fully wake up, just shifted slightly, confused, his head lifting off my chest as the rhythm beneath him changed. I remember his hair falling across his face, his small hands pressing into the mattress as he tried to orient himself. Then he noticed. His eyes opened fully, and for a moment there was only silence from him, no panic yet, just that split second where his brain was still trying to understand what it was seeing. Then I saw it register. My whole body is shaking uncontrollably. My breathing is breaking apart, the sound I couldn't make into words. "Hey, hey," he said quickly, his voice suddenly awake, sharp with alarm. "Hey, what's wrong?" I couldn't answer, I couldn't even focus my eyes properly. He didn't hesitate again after that. Noah scrambled upright, small hands fumbling for the bedside lamp. His fingers hit the switch on the second try and the room snapped into warm light. It made everything feel more real, more urgent. "Help," he called out, but his voice cracked halfway through. He was already moving before he finished the word. Bare feet hit the floor. The hallway door opened too fast, bumping lightly against the wall. "Noah," I heard my mother's voice from down the hall, already waking, already sensing something was wrong just from the noise. "Something's happening," he shouted back, breathless. "It's him, he's shaking, please hurry." There was no hesitation from him, no freezing, no confusion after that first second.